Good morning, everyone. This is Mike Dane with MLS Technology. Today we're going to be doing a presentation on Transaction Desk, or as it got rebranded a couple of years ago, it's just simply now Transactions. But let's go ahead and run through some basics for the webinar. So just as a reminder, for those of you guys who haven't been to our webinars before, everyone will be starting on mute by default. We're going to be using the Q&A button down at the very bottom of the screen to ask any questions that you may have. And there's a chat option as well. This is where you guys can post any comments, stories, whatever you guys would like to post in. But please try to make sure that you're focusing all of your questions into the Q&A option, primarily just because it makes a little bit more of a notification whenever I get a question asked, and we can always hold those questions and make sure that we answer them when they come up and stuff like that. So it's just a little bit easier for me. But if you guys do have any issues with the audio or video during the course, please let me know. I had to switch to a backup mic, so I'm hoping you guys can hear me all right. But if you guys have any problems with anything with the webinar, just let us know. Post it anywhere. Honestly, I know I'm kind of picky about the Q&A thing, but if you guys are having problems with your connection to the webinar, we want to make sure that you guys are still getting the CE credit that you want. And the only way I can do that is if I know that you have a problem. But worst case scenario, if you guys do end up having an issue, you can always get in contact with us at the service desk. Now, we are going to be presenting a recording of this after class is over, and we'll be sending the CE credit off to OREC by the end of the month. So you guys should, or you should see the CE credit applied to your OREC license before the end of the month. We usually send those the same day that the class occurs, but all right. Now the buttons that you guys have on your screen are fairly simple. Again, the chat and Q&A option we've already covered. The raise hand option, I wanted to let you guys know if you do have a question that you would like to ask with your voice, you can hit that raise hand option. I'll just assume that that means that you guys have a question that you would like to get unmuted for. But I wanted to remind you guys, since this is a relatively short, tightly packed class, we have a few people in here today. We might try to funnel as many of the questions into the Q&A, but I understand if you guys have a question that might not be very easy to explain or ask. And it's especially important if you guys are joining us on a mobile device. If you guys are joining us on a mobile device, those buttons won't appear at the bottom of your screen. You'll have to tap the screen and then they'll appear. You'll have the raise hand option again. Chat and Q&A are still down there as well. All right. Well, let's go ahead and start doing the poll. We have a poll that we're going to be presenting. Just so you guys are aware, this poll is actually going to be part of the CE credit. I need to make sure that everybody is here and participating. So please go ahead and answer that poll. I'll do a little bit more impromptu poll after we take our break at the top of the hour. We're going to take a 10-minute break at around 10 o'clock so that you guys can have a little bit of a reprieve from having to hear me talk at you. But when we come back, I'm going to have to check that everybody's here and make sure that we're not giving credit to people who've loaded up the webinar and walked away. And we'll be officially starting class in a little under a minute here. But thankfully everybody here should, actually literally everybody here should be eligible for CE credit as long as you guys are here for the rest of class. I see that everybody has answered the poll. We're going to wait another 30 seconds or so, just in case anybody was running a little bit late this morning. And then we'll get started with our class. All right, it is 9:05. We're going to go ahead and get started. So I wanted to address the poll, share those results. So we've got a pretty even split, it looks like. We've got 3 new people, 3 relatively new people, and 3 people that are not new. I'm going to try and curate at least a little bit of the class towards those of you guys who are new. We want to make sure that you're getting some context and some understanding of why you would be doing something. I do see that there's actually an interesting spread for what you guys are currently using. I see at least the majority of you guys are using Transaction Desk already. Got one person using ZipForm, another person using SkySlope, and then a few people that are actually already using DocuSign. All of these are fantastic tools. I have actually been really happy with transactions recently. Transaction Desk actually came out with a new version of their Authentisign system. We're going to be covering that in class today. For those of you guys who were using something else, I think you guys might be really happy with the way that they've redesigned the signing process. But we'll go ahead and get started with the more practical matters now. Take the poll off the screen. There we go. All right. So first things first, in order to get into Transaction Desk, or again, Transactions as it's officially branded now, when you get signed into the mlstechnology.com website, this is referred to commonly as just the MLS portal. This is where you guys should be landing when you first get signed in. Some people may still have links that go directly into Matrix, but this is where we would like for you guys to land so that you have access to all of your tools, as well as the knowledge base, some other details and forms and signing up for classes, etc. But if you guys would like to get into transactions from here, you can click on the little Transaction Desk icon, and that'll bring you to this home page. If you guys are in a different system like Matrix, there is a link here on the home page of Matrix under the external links widget that goes directly to Transaction Desk as well. And on Realist, there is also a quick link that allows you guys to just jump directly into creating a Transaction Desk transaction with any plot that you happen to find. So if you find a parcel that you guys are wanting to maybe set up a transaction with, get a listing agreement with, when you guys are looking at the report or looking at the parcel from the map, there's going to be an icon for Transaction Desk on the map or a link down here at the bottom right for Transaction Desk. But we're going to start with the actual home page here. So when you guys first get signed in to Transaction Desk, it brings you to this agent dashboard. Now, for those of you who are a little bit unfamiliar with this process, Transaction Desk is a paperless transaction system. So what we're going to be seeing here is there's going to be these transactions that we create where we gather all of the documents and forms and everything that we might need in order to create that transaction and get it sent off to be digitally signed. So when we land on this homepage, there's going to be the Create Transaction button. We're going to be going through this process a little bit later. We see that there's a list here of all of our transactions, a list of the signings that we've recently sent off, as well as any of the forms that we've recently filled out. Now you may end up seeing that there's another space down here at the bottom that has like a to-do list, or you might have customized your homepage already. But I've actually customized this so that I have my transactions list a little bit longer. And I did that by using this little lock icon up the top right corner. Now what this does is it actually unlocks each of these widgets so that you can start moving them around and putting them into better positions, depending on how you would like to actually use the system. You'll notice that it adds a little bit of texture to the top of these, and this allows you guys to know that this can be moved around and you can start clicking and dragging to reposition these. This is similar to the way that Matrix works. Matrix has a similar kind of widget layout movement style. The big catch with Matrix is that when you're trying to move things around, they just kind of start moving. There's no lock mechanism. There's no default option. I appreciate that in Transaction Desk, they actually have the option to just lock down everything so that if I don't want to accidentally move something around because I'm opening up Transaction Desk on my iPad and I'm trying to scroll down, but instead now all of a sudden my workspace is readjusted, we can just lock it or unlock it. Additionally, we have a whole bunch of widgets that are actually shown up here at the top. You can see that these kind of match what's already appearing here. For instance, we've already got a create transaction option. We've got a create template option. But if we wanted to, we can actually, let me scroll down here. I'm going to make my transaction list a little bit shorter. I'm actually going to grab this checklist option and drag that underneath where that was. So this might be what the screen looks like when you guys first get signed in, or maybe it's been rearranged a little bit so that you have the forms over to the side. But again, this is all customizable. So if you guys like a certain layout, you can make things longer, you can make things go away. If you just want to click the remove option, it'll just get sent back up to that tray and you can reposition everything to the way that you guys are working. Coincidentally, I actually used to teach a class on workspace optimization, real exciting stuff, obviously, but it was surprising to me how some people really hadn't ever thought about it that way. That like when you first land here, you might want to just see what you had just been working on, or if you're wanting to check the status of a signing that you just sent out earlier today, you can see that right away. These kind of little tweaks to how you guys are functioning on a daily basis can have a pretty substantial impact on your general workflow. But besides that, we're going to just go ahead and jump into the creating a transaction option. Now, when we first land on this page, again, we've got our transactions that have already been made, the signings, the forms, but the main backbone of the transaction desk system is creating a transaction where you're going to upload all of the details and all of the forms and all of the information that you might need for that particular property, that particular transaction, so that everything is gathered into one place. So when you click this create transaction button, the easiest way for me to describe this to people is that this is your folder. This is your manila folder that you're going to be dumping all of your Xeroxed forms into and getting all of your information about the clients into. So the main thing that you need to remember is that this name needs to be something coherent that you're going to recognize the next time you try and get in here. So for instance, the naming convention that I'm particularly fond of is just doing the last name of the individuals that are going to be involved, and then the address of the property. The reason I like this is just because this is going to remind me who it is that I might be working with and also what property it was. One of the better things about this is that if you do end up having an investor that you're constantly working with, oh, well, there's the investor's name, but also it shows the property. We find that every once in a while, people will be creating transactions where they just use the address and then they forget that they've already created something for that client because they're looking for the client that was involved. Or they name it after the client, but then they work with them again in the future. And they're like, well, now I've got two transactions with the same name. This just kind of prevents any of that confusion. But since this is open-ended and you guys can name things whatever you like, name it whatever is going to make sense to you and will help you in your endeavors. Now, there's a template option that shows up underneath the name portion. The template is effectively like if you have a package that you have of all the Xeroxed forms or something like that back in the day, and you just dump all of those in, you go back to the copy machine, make all of your copies and fill the next folder out, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of how the templates work. We're going to talk about how to create templates a little bit later in class, but for now, just remember that this option will only show up if you have templates that you've created or that your office has created. In my case, I have only just the one that I've gone through and made in the past, but this way I can just click on the residential listing packet. It automatically sets the type for this particular transaction and will fill in all of the, or not fill in, but grab all of the forms that I'm going to need for this residential listing. Now, today's class is primarily focused on just giving you some practical education. So the example that we're going to be focusing on is a residential listing. So just the initial steps, we don't have to worry about importing any data from Matrix or working with any other brokers or agents quite yet. This is just going to be for the simplicity of it. But on the type, which should appear on your screen, template may not, type almost always will unless you have templates that override everything. But under the type, I'm going to choose residential listing. Now, when I choose residential listing, you'll notice that this add me as the will automatically change over. So I'm going to click residential listing and add me as the automatically changed to listing agent. There's going to be some contextual changes that when you guys are filling everything out, it's going to automatically add new options, remove options, or maybe even present a completely different choice entirely, depending on what you've chosen already. So for instance, the type automatically ties over to this add me as the, just to make sure that it's connecting things properly. That doesn't mean that we're locked into place with this. If you guys need to go back and make a change to say that, oh, I'm just the admin, I'm just filling this information out for them, I'm just going to say neither. Or if you lucked out and you've got your listing and you're going to be doing both, cool, you can be listing and selling agent. But for now, I'm just going to leave it with the default. There's also an import data function. Now you notice that this actually does clarify that it's optional, which is funny because the only thing that's actually required on this page, according to the little red asterisks, is this little name thing up at the top. But the import data is actually something that you don't have to do and oftentimes might not have the opportunity to do depending on what level of information is available either in matrix or relist. Now, when we click on this dropdown, you'll see that those are the two options that we have. We've got a matrix option, which allows us to get the MLS number from the listings, or we can use relist. We're just going to have to choose the county and then put in the tax parcel ID. Now, when we're looking through this information in relist, the item that you actually need to put into this spot is going to be referred to as tax parcel. So again, when you're looking at relist and you load up a property, let's just zoom in here. The tax ID or the tax parcel, depending on what screen you're looking at, should be the same thing, but this is the code that we're going to want to use. So if I wanted to actually import this particular property from Pushmataha County, I'm going to have to say Pushmataha. Go. And then paste in that parcel number. Now, if this is information that you don't already have, that's not a problem. Over here to the right, there's a tax search button, which allows us to keep that same county that we've already chosen and then put in some extra details in case we didn't find the right information. All right. But for now, I'm just going to leave us with a completely blank transaction. I'm not going to try and import from a listing or from relist, just so you guys can see what it looks like from a just completely empty point of view. Because oftentimes this import data is really just going to be filling in property information like the address, the year built, the legal description, that kind of stuff. All right. Now, at the very bottom of all of this, there's a use wizard option. This is already checked. And this is something that's a system default. I can't stress this enough. I very strongly recommend that you guys actually use the wizard for this. We have agents that have been using Transaction Desk since the moment that we started offering it to members, and they still use the wizard even to this day, just because it allows you guys to kind of streamline your efforts and make sure that you're focused on just the things that you need to do and need to grab in order to start this process. So I'm going to click on the big button up here at the top. You guys are going to notice over the course of the class that a lot of Transaction Desk is kind of made for just big buttons, easy to use, simple, you know exactly where you're supposed to go next kind of stuff. So I'm going to click the create button. And this brings me to the wizard. Now it starts us off on the wizard on details, which is step 1 of 5. Now, when we're landing on this first page here, you'll notice that it starts us off with our transaction type. This is our last opportunity to make sure that this is changed before we've gotten everything solidified in here. We can always come back and modify this if need be, but at this point, we just want to make sure that this is set up and ready to go. We've got our transaction status over here to the right. You'll notice that this actually includes all of the basic statuses that you guys have access to in the MLS. There's one spare, which is actually what it's set to right now. It's called open. Now this open is effectively just a limbo state. So think of this as kind of pre-listing before it's actually gone active or coming soon. We're just still trying to get all the details filled out and put into the system. So this open status is actually ideal for what I'm doing right now, since this is a blank residential listing. I don't have my listing agreement set up. I don't have my listing number put in. So leaving it on open is ideal. I can always come back and change that up here at the very top of the screen. You'll notice that this little bar up at the top is actually going to follow with us through all of the wizard. And then whenever we're accessing any of the forms, contacts, details later, after we've filled everything out, we'll still see these bars up at the top. So we can always go back and change this to active once we have a listing. We can come back to our details and fill out the MLS number, and then change the status to whatever is appropriate later on down the line. But again, we're stuck on our wizard right now. I'm going to go ahead and put in some of the details about my property. Oh, I already forgot what Eufaula County is. Is that? Yeah, we'll just leave it blank. All right. Legal description, let's just put in. Perfect. And we'll give it a year built. Okay. So I've got some basic information in here. I'm not going to be too worried about trying to fill in all of the details. Again, we're just doing this for practice, but I'm going to put a list price in here. Let's see, make sure this is $1 billion. Oh, wait, one more zero. Perfect. Got $1 billion property here. I'm going to see if Elon Musk is going to be interested in this. So once we've gotten all the details filled out, again, nice big buttons up here at the top that bring me to next. This is going to start the transaction dates. Here today, gone tomorrow. Excellent. Actually, while we're here, I did want to just show you guys a couple things. Notice all the different date options that we have available. All of these are going to tie into things that you can create on the checklist. We don't cover the checklist in the training course currently, but if you guys are interested in using that, or you think that might be beneficial for your agents or for yourself, give that a try. There's a little question mark icon down here at the bottom left. If there's anything I don't know, this is where I'm going. They have guides, they've got tutorial videos, they've got webinars that they present. This is just a really great resource, but since we don't cover the checklists in class, we don't cover how those all tie into the dates and everything else, strongly recommended that you guys check that out at your leisure. So, but dates are put in. I'm going to click next. This brings us to our contacts. Now, before we actually address the contacts here, I did want to click on this previous button because there's this save and exit option that you guys are going to notice appearing at the bottom of each of these pages. The save and exit button is kind of like the ripcord for this wizard. If we end up finding that, you know what, I can't finish this right now, I just need to save the information that I have and dip. We can hit save and exit. It brings us to the transaction dashboard that we're going to see at the very end. And that way you guys can safely move on to get back into something else that you guys were working on at the time. Now I'm going to jump back into my transaction. If you guys do end up hitting that save and exit option and you need to get back to the wizard where you guys just were, if you get back into the transaction, the wizard button is right up here towards the top. So details are already filled out. Transaction dates are already filled out. Now we're back to contacts. The reason I saved that until we're on the step 3 is just because it's pretty obnoxiously close to the other information. A lot of people will think that they're done just because there's a button down there, but just remember we're on step 3. There's a next button. But on this contacts page, there's an add button over here to the right. When we click on this, there's going to be a few options here that probably aren't going to be of that much of a concern. The main one that you guys need to know is this create new transaction contact. If you guys click on this, it's going to present you with general and address. There's only a couple things that are actually required on here, the type and the name. So when we choose our type, I'm going to add in the seller, John Wilson. And that's it. That's the only thing that you actually have to fill out. Now, one of the most common, actually, I think probably literally the most common call that we get whenever we have somebody calling in about transaction desk is why they don't have an email address for their client whenever they've had signings before. And the most common thing that we have to address with this is just that whenever they created the contact, they did not add the email address in here. So I'm going to add in an email address right now just to make sure that they have their information in there. And I wanted to point out, this is going to be one of the things that's a little bit different for those of you guys who use .loop currently. .loop actually doesn't allow for people to have the same email address, but I'm going to create John as the seller. Save that. I'm going to go back to the add option, create new transaction contact. We'll do the other seller. Why not? There we go. And I'm going to use the exact same email address. Now, you don't have to worry. There's going to be some other options a little bit later on down the line to make sure that if you do have the same email address for two individuals, you can still add a PIN. And that PIN you just deliver to both of them individually, make sure that they aren't signing as each other, and you can still keep all of this above board. This particular stipulation that they didn't require everybody to have their own independent email address was actually part of the reason why, at least years ago, before the pandemic, there were some banks that weren't particularly fond of taking the transaction desk information. The main preventative method for that was literally just add a PIN onto the signing, and then you know that the only way that these people could have actually gotten in there is if they had shared their PIN with each other. But I mean, it's just like mailing things to get signed anyway. So I've got my email address added in here for my second signer. And I mentioned before when we were talking about choosing the transaction type that it automatically added me as the listing agent because I chose the residential listing option. Whenever we chose the seller, so like I'm going to switch her over to the buyer, the address option is just blank. But if I switch her to seller, the address option will have a little checkbox up at the top here that says same as property address. Now, same as property address will just take the data that we already filled out, so the details that we filled out when we first created this transaction, and dump all of that information in there for me. So saving me the trouble of actually having to fill this information out. And then all of this information will be filled out on any of the forms that we're going to be filling out later. So it's always important to make sure that you guys got everything that you need in here. Another couple considerations for the transaction contacts. Let's say that you guys do end up in a situation where you have someone that's going to be doing representation for a business. So the business is actually part of the transaction, but you have a specific individual from the business that's going to be doing the signing and all the other things that are related to this. So this legal name option is where you guys can put a business name, because the legal name is going to be appearing on all of the spaces where the buyer or the seller's name will appear. So if it's a business that's doing that, that's what will appear. But if we want to make sure that, you know, in this case, Martha needs to put Martha down on her signature, it's going to automatically grab whoever the individual is, because again, remember, these are required. The legal name is not. But then the preferred signature is where they can put in what they would like to sign as. Additionally, if you guys have someone that's maybe Robert and they want to sign as Bob or Rob or whatever they want to sign as, you can put in their preferred signature down here as well. Additionally, you can also put in the preferred initials. It's going to automatically assume, if you guys don't fill these out, that the preferred signature is just the first and last name, and then the preferred initials are just going to be the first and last initial. But if you guys end up in a case where you've got, you know, Michael Wilson and Martha Wilson, then you may end up wanting to put the preferred initials in there with their middle initial just to ensure that that's filled out, or fill in their middle initial and you're good to go. All right. There is a little checkbox down here at the bottom, add to address book. If you guys don't anticipate working with this client again in the future, you can uncheck that. But the default, whenever you guys notice me clicking on this, maybe, the default is to actually leave that box checked. I would recommend unchecking it if you guys are going through a practice run, or if you guys aren't going to be working with this client again in the future. But you never know, that person may have had a really positive experience with you and you need to reach out to them in the future. Well, I've already got their information. Might as well just leave them in my address book. And then if you guys want to add them to the transaction later, or a different transaction, you can go to this add, and there's add existing contact. So once we've added people into our address book for transaction desk, we can always use them again with that add existing contact. But we got to put them in there first with create new transaction contact. All right, so we're all set for our transaction contacts. We've got the listing broker. Of course, this will actually be the name of the office. We've got ourselves as the listing agent. Again, that's because I chose that this was a residential listing. So I'm going to click on next. And this brings us to our forms. Now, the forms is going to be where we finally get an opportunity to see one of the main differences between how transaction desk refers to things and how maybe some of the other systems that you guys might have used in the past or are currently using refer to things. So when we're looking at the forms, forms are the interactive elements. So this is where we're going to have something that's going to be fillable. This is where we start seeing some of the details and contact information get automatically dumped onto a form for us so that we don't have to fill it out. The next tab that we're going to go to, the final step of the wizard, is actually the documents. Documents are going to be static information. This is stuff that's already been filled out, things that have been scanned, that kind of stuff. But we're going to cover that in a moment. Just remember, forms are interactive. All right. So when I click on the add button this time, instead of presenting me with the options to create something new or whatever, this is actually going to present me with a series of folders. Now, these folders contain all of the different interactive forms that we make available to members. But you are going to notice, I am so sorry. You're going to notice that a lot of these are actually based on the location. So Ada had some forms that were specific to their association that they wanted to kind of keep separated out from any of the other forms that we have in our system. Same thing goes for Bartlesville, which was one of the first associations to join GTAR. We've got the commercial contracts. We've got membership forms. This is membership specific to GTAR and our MLS technology. We've got the MLS specific forms, which we'll be visiting a little bit later in class, as well as property management and the generic residential forms. Now, the generic residential and property management and commercial are all going to contain forms that are specific both to GTAR and OREC, whereas the rest of these more location-based parts are going to be either duplicate forms from OREC, or they're going to sometimes be association-specific forms. So if you guys are just with GTAR and just with MLS technology, then you may not even have to worry about any of these other forms, but they're available for those of you guys who are from SOAR, SOBR, ADA, whatever. Now, if you guys want to get the OREC forms, the quickest and easiest way to find those is under the generic property management or residential or commercial forms. So I'm going to go into this residential folder. And you'll notice that we have a huge amount of forms that are already present in here. We've actually gone through, this was kind of a thorn in my side for a while because it kind of drove me nuts. I don't know if it was bothering anybody else, but a lot of the forms that were specific to GTAR or even the forms that were specific to OREC didn't really have proper labeling. So what would end up happening is that people were like, well, I'm trying to find the OREC version of such and such form. Well, lo and behold, they weren't finding it because it was just given some generic name and it wasn't clear that it was something from OREC or GTAR or whatever the case may be. So we've gone through and tried to make sure that all of them are changed. It just happens to be that this particular one right here is actually the one that's not changed. This form is functional. It's just we're trying to get it renamed right now. Anyway, because there is a pretty long list of forms for us to choose from, we might need to actually grab things either just by scrolling up and down, checking a checkbox, or you guys can make your lives a little bit easier by using this search function up at the top right. Now, the search function comes with one major caveat. Let's say that I'm trying to get my exclusive right to sell listing agreement. So I'm going to type in exclusive. That's a unique word that's probably not going to appear, at least in a huge variety of forms. And when you guys run your search, you're going to notice that the search is going to provide you all of the forms that include that in their name, and it might not necessarily be the form that you're looking for. So keep track of both the name of the transaction, or the name of the form, excuse me, and then there's also going to be a little folder reference down below that. So you'll notice this little folder name is actually in black, whereas the form name is going to be the blue. So I'm trying to find, here we go. Here's our GTAR version, and here's the listing agreement from OREC. So this one's labeled OREC form, and it's in the residential contracts and forms folder. I think I'm pretty confident that that's the one that I need. So when I check this checkbox, you'll notice that it immediately checked a checkbox down below it. If I uncheck either of these, you'll notice that it unchecks the other. And there's actually another one, oops. Oh, right up here at the top, the 801. So what this is actually indicating to us is that all three of these forms are actually the exact same form. They just happen to be in those separate folders. If you guys get concerned that you've accidentally added too many things, or that you've clicked on one and it added 3 copies of it or something, don't worry. You guys can see this little basket up here at the top. Just check and uncheck it to make sure that it only increases by 1. Now, once you're confident that you've got the form that you need, you can always run back up to the search here. Let's say that I wanted to do the disclosure of lead-based paint. So I'm going to type in lead. And we've got disclosure of lead-based paint. Yep, that looks like the one. I'm going to check that checkbox. Did I choose the wrong one? Oh, I did choose the wrong one. I need the sales one. Here we go. Check that one. Oh, and fancy that. It happened to grab the one from the residential contracts and forms folder as well. So, but I should be set. Oh, and you know what? I fumbled the year built. I should have put an older year built in order to make sure that was valid. But anyway, we'll just pretend that they got some really old paint. So I'm going to click add. And this provides me with all of the forms that I'm going to be using for this particular transaction. If you guys do end up needing to go back to add more, you still can. So for instance, if I end up getting the buyer as well, cool. I'm going to have to come back here, click on the add, and get into the other details. Let's do a blank addendum as well, so I can have some empty space to use. There we go. Excellent. All right. So I'm done with my forms. I'm going to click on next. This brings us to the final step of the transaction creation wizard. Now, the last step here is the documents. Now, I've mentioned already that the forms are going to be all the interactive things. We're going to be taking a look at that in actually just a minute here. But the documents being static is actually, again, referring to the fact that this particular item that we're adding is either already complete, or maybe it has some information on there that we need to maybe get signed, filled out, whatever. But the information is not automatically going to be filled out like it would be on the forms. I'm going to have to manually go in, make some changes to things. So when I click on add up here, instead of presenting me with the folder that has all of the different forms and things like that, this is actually going to be checking my computer. Now, if we have something that we already wanted to use, we can simply just come in here with our folder and then just drag and drop whatever the item is. If it's a PDF, a Word document, a scan that's a JPEG, anything like that. But if you guys aren't really comfortable with doing that and having the folder already open or whatever, there's always the option to just click on this blue space and it'll allow you guys to do the upload. So in my case, I'm going to go ahead and upload this Pawnee one. There we go. And we're all set. Now we can make modifications to this as well. You notice that right now it's mostly focused on just trying to get us to add everything that we need. This is one of the differences between loading forms and documents outside of the wizard. It's just focused on trying to get you through this process so that you're finally done and you've got a complete transaction ready to start filling out and sending off to sign stuff. So I'm going to click on done. This brings us to the transaction dashboard. Now we saw this earlier when I showed you guys how to escape the wizard, but it brings us to the transaction dashboard once we're done with the wizard as well. This is where we can see our detail overview. It shows us all the information that we have filled out for this particular transaction already. as well as all the forms that we have. This is going to grab some of the details from this detail page, as well as any of the contact information from contacts. Then we also see a little preview of our documents over here. And then if you guys go through the process of customizing this particular layout, we can add in checklist items, we can add in the contacts list. So you can always, again, customize all of this to whatever you guys are going to be using the most, just to make sure that you have everything set up the way that you like it. So over here on the right-hand side, we're going to see this little navigation bar. Now, it may collapse on you from time to time, depending on what screen you're looking at, but there's always going to be this little menu button up here at the top right corner that you can expand, and it'll show you your list of all of the different places you can go within this transaction. Now, I want to make sure that this is clear because this is something that we get a lot of phone calls about. Once you guys have actually opened a transaction, so I'm sitting here on my transaction dashboard, I see the name of the transaction, the address, the seller, so on and so forth. This is indicating to me that any of these buttons over here on the right-hand side will be related to this particular transaction. The main confusion that we see a lot of people calling in about is over here on the left-hand side, we see similar icons to the things that we're actually going to be trying to do for this transaction. So just remember, all of the things that are showing here on the left-hand side are directly related to transaction desk. So just the whole system. This brings us back to the dashboard for the entire system. This brings me to a list of all of my transactions, all of my signings, no matter which transaction they were on, all of the different forms that are in the system, so on and so forth, just all the way down the line. But if I go over here to the right, this is showing me all of the information for this transaction. So for instance, if I go into details, I can finally come back and add in my MLS number once it's ready. I can adjust my date there, hit the save button, get that information up to date. I've got my date options down here in the details. But again, all of this is related to what we've already been filling out. Now, if I go back to my dashboard and I'm ready to start filling out some of my forms that we've added on here, that's actually going to be found either in this forms widget where we can click go to forms, or over on the right-hand side here, we can actually click on forms as well. Now, both of them should present the exact same information, but you'll notice that this time we've actually got some extra buttons over here to the right. And the same thing goes for documents. Remember when we were adding documents in the wizard, it didn't give us anything but a trash can over on the side. Now we've got a submit button, which means that I can submit this over to my broker for review if I've got something that's already been signed, or if there's a document that needs to be verified. There's a little checkbox here that fills up the basket. And there's even a menu button that allows us to do a bunch of other options, some of which we'll be addressing a little bit later. But my forms actually need to be filled out before I can do anything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to click on this listing agreement option. And when you click on the name of that form, it's going to bring you into effectively an editing mode. Now, depending on how big your screen is or how zoomed in you are, you may end up noticing that there's some labels up here at the top. So like there's a file, it just has a little icon there, fonts, clause, transaction, forms, save and exit. The more zoomed out you are, doesn't really make a difference. But as soon as you start zooming in, or if you guys end up having a screen that's really small or really low resolution, you may notice that those labels go away. You can always hold your cursor over them to find out which ones are which. But down here on the editing side of things, we have a bunch of blue spaces. And you'll notice that a bunch of these blue spaces have actually already been filled in. Remember when I just pasted in a bunch of stuff for the legal description? All of that automatically got filled out for me. Same thing with the address. Even the price was automatically imported over, as well as the listing agreement start date and end date. So now these blanks that are just blue, don't have any information in them already, are details that I'm going to have to fill out on a form by form basis. So for instance, if I'm just going to do just some numbers, $1 million. There we go. Within 1 day, perfect. All right, so I've got some information filled out on that page. I'm going to keep scrolling down until I find some checkboxes. Just like any good system should do, If you check something that's going to be contradictory to something you've already chosen, it's going to automatically uncheck that. So if I choose is not, it's going to automatically uncheck the is option. All right. Also, there's going to be some spaces on some of the forms where there may be lines appearing. So for instance, on the print version of this form, the other conditions actually has a series of lines the same way that anything else does, just to make sure that if you're doing this by hand, you have, some coherent writing that goes correctly horizontally rather than kind of up and off to the side like my handwriting often goes. With Transaction Desk, they have the option to just automatically erase all of those lines, and any text that you start writing will automatically cover that up. Now, additionally, if you have any spaces on the forms that require a date, they will actually provide you with a little calendar button so that when you're filling this out, you can just click on the date and it'll put it into the correct format for you. So for instance, if I needed to make a change to my list date or list expiration date here, if I click on this little expiration date button, the calendar, I can change that to a different date. Now I'll still have to go back into my details to make sure that that's updated there, but that's just an easy way to make sure it's correct on the form that I'm filling out. All right. Something to mention, at least down on this particular form, if we had provided a phone number for any of the individuals, they would actually have those phone numbers appear on here for us. Same thing that we see happen down here for the email. All right. Now, once we've gotten everything filled out on this particular form, the option up here at the top, Save and Exit, will actually bring us back to our list. This way I can just dive back into one of the other forms. Coincidentally, not the easiest option as far as changing forms. So I'm going to jump into my disclosure of lead-based paint, make sure that everything is ready on this form. It's got the address, it's got some checkboxes on here that the client will need to fill in. We've got John and Martha and myself. Okay, looks like everything is ready to go. I want to switch over now to the blank addendum. So instead of actually going to the save and exit option or having to save and then exit out of here, there is a button up here at the top. It's just a little transaction forms button. Again, if you're zoomed in too much, it won't have a label. If you zoom out, it'll actually be labeled up here automatically. But when you click on this button, we can actually just move directly into the next item from this list. So I can just click on the blank addendum and it brings me to the blank addendum without any returning to the list on a different page. It's just, I don't remember exactly what it was. It depends on your network connection and the computer you're on, but it'll save you a couple seconds each time. So it's worth it to know that that's there. I mentioned earlier that Transaction Desk will automatically cover up any lines. So for instance, if we do end up in a situation where we needed to fill out blank addendum, as soon as I click on this space, nothing's happening. But if I paste or put in text or start typing, whatever the case may be, it's going to automatically get rid of those lines so that they're not interrupting any of the text that you're adding. So I'm going to put in there we go. So I got my blank addendum put in. I'm going to come down here to the bottom. And we've noticed on all of the forms like the lead-based paint and the listing agreement that when we got to those forms, there were already names appearing in the spaces that were appropriate. So the sellers already had their names in, the sellers' email addresses were already filled in, the sellers' email addresses, the price was put in, et cetera, et cetera. Some forms actually don't have specific roles represented on the form. So in this case, if I actually wanted to make sure that John and Martha were in here, I'm going to have to manually type those out. There we go. Perfect. So I've got those added in, and I think I should be all set. Now, when we were going through and filling these forms out, you notice that I didn't go through and do any saving or anything like that. One of the important things about Transaction Desk that they changed, I think a couple years ago, or maybe it was longer than that. Time's weird nowadays, isn't it? You could go to the file option up here at the top and save. I would still recommend, just again, from somebody who lost an entire hard drive worth of my curriculum and artwork that I had made and all sorts of other relatively important things. I'm always paranoid. I always save anyway. This is just a force of habit for me. I'd rather save too many times than not have something saved at all. It's just caused a lot of problems. So you can go to file, you can save. And what that'll do is make sure that this form is saved so that you don't have to worry if I navigate over to my listing agreement and make some changes on here, and I'm not hitting the save and exit button. I'm just navigating straight to another form. I can still save up here at the top to make sure that any of those modifications that I made are saved for the future. So fairly simple. But now that I'm ready, I've got all my forms filled out and I need to just send these on to the client. I can click back up here to my transaction forms, and I see those check boxes that we saw whenever we were initially adding these forms. It's going to do the exact same thing that it did last time. I check the checkbox and it starts filling up a little basket up here at the top right. Now, this little basket actually allows me to do a lot of different things. I've got the sign and authenticign. We can copy all of these over into a different transaction. We can download a zip file of this. So if I needed to get all of these into a file and send them off to somebody else, I can download that zip. We can print these off. We can save all of them into one PDF file, which is really handy if you guys want to send off something to someone. It's going to put all of the pages in the same order that you guys see them here into a PDF for you. There's also an email option. You can choose either to send it as a transaction desk file, which means that they can only open it on the website, or you can actually send it as an attachment. And then finally, if you guys need to communicate with somebody from 1997, you can send them a fax as well. But if you guys do have a time traveling fax machine, let me know. I have some information to send to my young self. But in the interim, I'm going to try and get this all sent off to be signed. We've got our checkboxes filled out. We've got our basket filled up. So I'm going to go to this sign and authenticign option. Oh, we got a question. There you go, Tammy. It's got the option on your screen
Hi.
to unmute. Hey.
Hi. Just real quick, what did you click on to get to that screen that's showing right now?
Oh, this was from the basket. So whenever we were looking at the, go ahead.
Got it. Yep. That's all I needed.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we got to the forms, checked, and basket. Perfect. Yeah, and when we have selected all of our forms, this is another opportunity for us to make sure, like if I kind of checked these off willy-nilly, and I get to this place and I'm seeing, wait, I don't need this one sent off to be signed right now. You can just remove it from there. We actually got a few people that have asked questions about that in the past, about whether or not we have to send all of the forms for signing at once. That's not the case, especially if you guys start representing both sides of the transaction. Just make sure that you're checking the check boxes for only the things that you need to send off. But I'm going to hit this send to authenticign option. And there's two different choices for this. So far, we've actually just been continuing with the old version. I can't do that in good conscience anymore since we've only got a couple months left on the old version of things. And this new and improved thing that they're mentioning here, I very strongly agree with. It was a surprising difference in the level of quality between the old version, which was kind of clunky and required a lot of things, didn't have as many options, but it was also just harder to use for some reason. The new version is significantly improved. And they even have a little webinar that goes through this entire signing process just by itself that they present as well. That's down under that question mark icon down at the bottom left. So I'm going to hit send to new authenticign. And we are actually going to take our break right here, and I will see you guys back at 10:05. I don't want to get too deep into this, just so that we can make sure to give it its due attention. All right. So I will put the video on the screen, and I will see you guys back at 10:05. Just as a reminder, we're going to be doing a little quick poll. If I don't see that you guys raise your hand whenever you come back from break, I won't be able to provide you with CE credit for the class. So please make sure to be back at 10:05. I'm going to put the music on, and we will see you then. Man, that song kind of faded out at the exact right moment. Let's hop back into this. Oop. There we go. All right, it is 10:05. If I could get everybody to hit that raise hand button. Just want to make sure that we're all back from our break, and then I can go ahead and continue. Again, welcome back. Hopefully you guys got some coffee like I did, and we can power through the rest of the class. Amy, John, Neil, if I could get you guys to hit that raise hand option, just want to make sure you guys can hear me all right, and that we're all back. Oh, thank you, John. Amy and Neil, I think should be it, and we're good to go. Just so you guys are aware why we're doing this little hand raising exercise. OREC previously was going to start requiring us to have cameras going the entire time, so you guys would actually have to like present your faces. So this is kind of our spot check to make sure that everybody's paying attention and actually present for the class. This way you guys don't have to go through quite as much to get the CE credit for something. But excellent. All right, everybody's gotten it. I appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and jump back into it. Okay, so what we had done was we went through, we grabbed the forms that we were interested in getting signed. So now what we're looking at here is going to be the signing process. Now we started with the new signing process. This is the new Authentisign, or Authentisign 2.0, I think is what they officially refer to it as. So it's going to give you guys some guidance the first time you go through this process. So I'm actually reset my stuff so that you guys can see this. So what we're going to be seeing here is, instead of the old process that we had, where we had this kind of, you had to go through a bunch of steps and add in people and so on and so forth. What they're going to be focusing on now is actually similar to a lot of the other modern systems, where there's a series of buttons over here on the right-hand side. And we're just going to kind of run through all of those until we get to the options and we can finally send off the invitation at the end here. Now, the first thing that it's going to ask us to do is actually add the participants that we're going to have. So in our case, we need to find out who's signing. I'm going to hit got it. We're going to be adding in our docs after. And then after we're done with that, we're going to add in all of the extra things that we need to get signed, like on the blank addendum, we had a poll that we needed to add. We needed to add some signature blocks on there. So that's what we're going to be doing under tools. So I'm going to say I'm done. Then we're going to click on add participants. So when you click on add participants, it provides you with a bunch of basic options. We've got add yourself, add new, add from transaction, add from contacts, or add from Google. Now, the add from contacts and add from Google were similar options to what we had already been presented. In our case, instead of adding ourselves or adding someone new, which would not be a transaction contact that we've already established, we're going to click on this add from transaction. And when you click on add from transaction, it's going to present you with the list of all of the people that can sign, including yourself. So again, there was the option to add yourself here. We can do it again here. But in my case, I just want to add John and Martha. Now, one of the only things that they've actually removed from the new system is the option to do a remote signing, but it's going to be something you do in person. So it's still digital. It's still something that you can do on the computer. But the old version of Authentisign actually provided an in-person option so that the email would go to you as the listing agent. Since that function wasn't really getting as much usage as I think that they were hoping, they just decided to eschew it and get just the options that people are using the most, which is remote signer, reviewer, and CC. So remote signer means that I'm going to be sending an email to this particular address that we have for the client. And then we're going to be giving the option to complete the signing from there. The reviewer option means that it's just kind of a binary yes or no. Reviewer is a great option if you guys are working with a lawyer, or if you guys have somebody that just kind of wanted to check everything over, even though maybe they're not necessarily legally required to put their signature on things. And then there's also the option for CC. Now, the difference between reviewer and CC is that reviewer means that, again, they have to actually approve whatever it was that was sent to them. It's a yes or no option, but that's it. With CC, they're just getting a copy of it, and that's the only thing they receive. There's no compulsion to approve it or anything like that. Oftentimes, the CC is just going to be sent out whenever you guys are done with the signing. You can always send those files separately later, but this just makes sure that it's automatically sent. All right, so I've got both of my sellers involved. I'm going to hit select, and that moves them into the position here where we see John Wilson and Martha Wilson are ready to go. If I need to make any changes to how John is going to be signing, I can click on his name and we can see all of the different details, most of which we've actually already seen. So we've already filled out John Wilson, we've already given him an email address, we've already clarified his role. But if we come back in here and we needed to maybe add in an email address or maybe update his email address, there is a little checkbox here to update transaction contact. So in case we do end up having maybe a contact that we created, and again, we forgot to put in the transaction or forgot to put in the email address for the contact, we can still fill that out when we start the signing process. I still strongly recommend that you guys actually fill all the information out when you initially create the contact, but we do have this little backup option to make sure that you guys can get that updated, even if you're kind of a little bit past the point that you would need to be. Now, we mentioned earlier that we've got both of these sellers set up with the same email address that they'll be receiving the signing process at. Now, in order to make sure that I'm all above board and I don't have John signing for Martha or Martha signing for John, I'm going to actually have to assign them pins. Now, on the pin, just as a reminder, don't make it something that's too easy to guess. It might actually be better to communicate with each of the clients individually, maybe preferably over the phone or through text message, and get the PIN that they would like to put on there. But if you give them a PIN, it's far less likely that they're going to use the same PIN that they use everywhere else that maybe their significant other already knows. But I'm going to just put in something that's definitely not safe and secure, so don't use this in real life. But got that put in, and I'm going to give them some custom initials. There we go. And we're all set. Now, the signature options down here at the bottom, I would just leave these as they are. This is actually going to be the exact same format that you guys are used to before, where you can either choose your signature font, choose your signature by drawing it out manually. They also have recently added an upload signature image, which that way you can actually just take a signature that you already have and put it on there, which I don't know how many people are doing that, but it doesn't really seem that wise, but it's available if you would like it. All right, so I've given John his PIN. I'm going to make sure to hit save down here at the bottom so that all of his information is up to date. And then we're going to do the same thing with Martha. Martha's going to get a PIN as well, get her custom initials, and we're all set. Perfect. All right, so we've got our signers set up. If I needed to add anyone else, again, I have the option to down here, but I always recommend using this add from transaction. This add new option can be pretty confusing. Just use add from transaction. All right, now we've got the docs option next. This is going to show us the 3 different documents that we've added. And this also provides us the opportunity to rearrange these. So we can click and drag to move these into a different position, which will change where they're actually going to be positioned when they're going through the signing process. If we maybe got to the point that we're actually at the signing and, oh, you know what, there was that document that I needed to add or that form that I forgot to check when I was going through to add this, we have the option to click add a document or form. And this is going to show, by default at least, my transaction. And it shows the form that I forgot. Oh, I can click add there. And then it also shows this tax document. Maybe I needed to add some signatures to this as well. So I'm going to click add there. All right. So now I can hit close. I see all of my documents and forms here now. And again, if I needed to rearrange any of these, I can click and drag to put those in a different position. Next, we have our tools option. Now the tools by default are actually going to allow for us to just click and drag things over. I did actually want to mention there's some basic options that you guys will have access to making changes to, and you can save those as defaults so that the next time you guys go through this process of dragging something on there, you don't have to worry about re-adding the same things over and over and over again. So for instance, whether or not something is required or not, whether or not it has a date stamp that automatically gets added at the same time, all of those can be changed under the default tool settings. Now, first and foremost, when you guys get to this tools section, keep track of the seller, or excuse me, the signer that you have up here at the top. Whoever it is that you choose on here, so if I chose John or if I chose to do Martha, that's who's going to actually have their name whenever we drag and drop this on there. So for instance, if I needed to make sure that Martha signed this particular form, if her signature was not there already, here, I'm just going to get rid of it. I'm going to click and drag. And whenever that drops on there, it's going to automatically say required. And notice this even added in a little date form on here as well. I'm going to just click on that. We can either delete it, we can add something else, or over here on the side, we can make it larger or smaller. We can change what format it's going to show up in, or we can just delete it entirely. You can also resize these just by clicking on each item and then just clicking and dragging to make it larger or smaller. And then we also have the option, just like it said earlier, to change what each of these has on them. So for instance, if I wanted to leave the date stamp on there whenever I drag and drop one of those signature blocks, whatever choice I make in here, I can save as a default, and that's it. But in my case, I don't need a date stamp, so I'm good to go. Let's actually head back to our tools. Let's get this section here filled out. Oh, no, wait, that's the Oh, this is where we need it to be. Okay, so I've got Martha. I needed to put her signature down here at the bottom. Whenever I drop that down, notice it added my date frame as well. I can move that into position up here. I can resize everything to make sure that it's appropriate. And then I need to add in the signature for John. Oops, looks like I accidentally added in the wrong signature block. If you guys do end up in a situation where you've accidentally put in just anything at all, and it's assigned to the incorrect person, click on it. And over here on the right, you can make the change to a different individual. Notice it did not affect the one that I just added. It's only affecting the one that I have selected currently. Resize that one, put the date in the proper position, and we're all set. Now I'm going to switch over to John's information. Let's now talk about this initials option. When we add the initials, you notice that it's just adding a little spot. It's saying that it's required. I can uncheck that to make it not required. I can add a date stamp if I needed to, all those same options that we saw before. But it's important to note there's actually an automatic option for the initials. So I'm going to get rid of this one. Instead of using the initials where you have to click and drag to put it over there, there's also an initial pages option. So whenever we click on initial pages, I'm going to say I want it to be small, I want it to be to the right, and I want it to be at the top of the document. I'm going to make sure that I get both John and Martha to put their signatures or their initials on, in this case, the COVID-19 amendment and also the tax document. We can even narrow this down further. So if there was only initials required on one of the pages, so for instance, if I only needed it on page 1 and 3, there we go, I just add in a comma and I'm good to go. Or I can just leave it on the all, which requires it for all pages. Now notice what happens once we're done with this initial pages option. I hit place initials. And now I've got the initials, again, top right of the page, top right of the page. And it looks like maybe I don't need these since there's a signature block on there already. I can just delete those. Notice it does not affect any of the other ones that were automatically placed. Now a little further down, I can see on my tax record information, looks like I accidentally put this on the wrong page. I can get rid of that. Looks like I put both of these on the wrong page. So I can go back to initial pages, small, right, top. Maybe I wanted to put that at the bottom instead. Both, and page 2 instead. Place initials. There they are. Now, there's also going to be some interaction that the client can have. Let's say that they needed to add in some text. There's a text line option. We can click on that. We can resize it. We can change what the character limit is, whether it's required or not, whether they have a transparent background, or if it's a multi-line option. So this way we can actually add in a lot more text. But what this is actually going to require of, in this case, John, is that he's actually going to have the option to put some text in there. Now, since I've set this to be required, he will not be able to complete the signing until he adds some text into this space. Now, this can be especially handy if you guys have something that's on a page like this. If you guys maybe have some company documents or the disclosure of lead-based paint, and you need to add in a space for the client to actually put some text. You can have that put in there. And again, make sure it's on required if it's going to be something that's required, and you'll be good to go. There's also checkbox options. Now, the checkbox option is actually better for acknowledgements. So for instance, if this was, do you acknowledge this is one thing or another? Or maybe the client had actually clarified for us that this, oops, let me get rid of this. Can't move back on a different document. There we go. They already know that they have lead-based paint present in the house. So I'm just going to add the checkbox there for them to check. And then the text line for them. Maybe they don't need this, or it is required. But these are just for acknowledgements. If we have an actual multiple choice option, so like let's say that this is going to be presented between yes or no, we have the option to do radio choice. Now, radio choice will automatically add two different options. And then if I needed to put my text line back on here, it's a little bit longer, and I don't need it to be required because if he does end up choosing yes up here, I'm going to need to have him fill information out. But if he chooses no, this isn't going to need to be required. So go, and if we delete one, it deletes both of them. But I was actually going to use that for this choice right here. So we can click and drag to move these on there. So like if I wanted to drop them into a specific position, I can click and drag to do that. In my case, though, I'm just clicking on things and acting a little willy-nilly. So we've got these two options here. Let's say that the multiple choice option that you have is actually a little bit longer. There's more options that you need to choose from. I'm going to choose the first, hit the plus, move the next one into position. So now I've actually got 1, 2, and 3. Same thing goes if I needed to add more, move it into the proper position, and so on. But you'll notice that it doesn't get rid of the entire selection if you get rid of just one, unless you're down to the final 2. Now, the last option, this is something new. We've got the drop down. The drop down is actually going to allow us to choose from a selection of choices. You can give it a little tooltip text so that if they're not sure what this is referencing, if it's maybe not in a position that has a lot of information. So like if I wanted to say any fruit allergies. I'm actually not sure what fruits people can be allergic to, but we'll just put fruits I know. There we go. Imagine being allergic to apples. You pretty much couldn't buy any juices from the store. Okay, so I've got that put in there. If I click on this, you'll notice that each of the options actually has to be entered as its own line. So you type in the option, hit enter, type in the option, hit enter, and you can even choose a default option. Oh, I mean, none of the above. There we go. And since this is required, I'm going to turn that off so that they don't have to put that on there if they don't want to. Excellent. Now you may notice that all of the stuff I've been adding under John. Let's say that I do have something that I wanted to create for Martha as well. I can hit duplicate, it drops it down here. I'm going to put it back into position there. And then I'm going to make sure that this one goes over to Martha. So they both have the exact same options. And they both can fill this out. And it even remembers whether or not it was required or not. All right. Excellent. Oh, and actually something that they've recently added that I genuinely appreciate. So previously, if you guys wanted to, you could right click on one of these and then add in the names. Let's say that I got to this point and on my blank addendum, I forgot to actually label underneath each of these. So I forgot to put John, I forgot to put Martha. You can actually use these full name, email address, auto date, and auto time to add that information in there. So if I needed to add in John, add in his signature, put his date in the right position, switch it over to Martha, add in Martha, put in her email address, put in what the date is, right up there, and then the sign here. This isn't needed, I can delete it. Perfect. So it really helps. It used to be that this was something that you had to go through a lot of extra steps to actually add. I appreciate that they've just added some buttons on here. Now, another thing that they recently added, I'm going to just click on these and hit delete. There we go. Another thing that they added recently was the markup is actually a part of the tools. So instead of having one whole section that was the drag and drop options and then another whole section that was markup, they've actually combined those into just one interface. Again, I really like the way that they've changed this. Any feedback that you guys have, though, make sure to give that over to this little question mark to the right. But I'm going to add in a text box. These down here. There we go. So I'm going to add in a little text box here, and we'll say, there we go. Oh, Mike, come on, click in the right spot. Any So we can add in any text. We can also add in any highlights. So if there was something that we needed to make sure was correct, we can Give it a little highlight on there like that. There's even a line option where you can just do a straight line. And there's a freehand line as well, if you guys wanted to get a little loopy. Additionally, there's an ellipse that you guys have the option for. And any of these shapes that you guys have added, if you guys needed to make any changes to it, click on it. You can change what the color is of the line. You can change the color of the highlight. You can even change it to all black, change its opacity to completely blacked out, make it look like a CIA document from back in the day. Just as a reminder, this isn't necessarily legal. And also, it's very simple to get rid of. There was a relatively famous court case, oh man, I want to say like 3 or 4 years ago now, where the people that were actually getting indicted sent over some of the required documentation. It was kind of meant to just be evidence or whatever. But they blocked out a bunch of stuff with these black bars. And of course, this was being sent over to the FBI. So the FBI was just like, oh, neat. You guys put a digital black bar over a bunch of incriminating evidence. Let's just delete that. And, oh, wow. And they end up indicting a bunch of extra people. But anyway, just a fun little story of dumb criminals. So we're all set. I've gotten everything into the right position. I've got my initials. I've got some signing blocks. I've got the tax forms that they need to make sure. Oh, yeah, it looks like all this information is correct. So I think I should be set. Now, let's say that we do end up in a situation where this was a company document instead. So this was some PDF that I uploaded and I sent off to the person with all of these parts and pieces already added on there. But I'm going to be using this exact same form, even this exact same layout again and again. Well, the term I just used is the name of this particular function. It's layouts. So layouts allows us to do something pretty simple. We can create a layout taking one of these layouts that we've set up. So like if I'm going to be using, again, this exact same information and I have it all laid out in perfect order and everything's lined up how I want it to be. When you go to layout, you can create a layout of this particular form. So I'm going to say blank addendum, fruit basket. There you go. And I hit create. Now, what this does is it actually says that the next time I come into this particular form, if I needed to, I can actually get rid of all of these little parts and pieces that we have on here. Oh, and I think this was also added later. There we go. So if I come back in and I've got a brand new signing, completely different clientele, I can come over to layouts, layout options, apply layout. I find my blank addendum one, choose from the dropdown, which has it at the bottom of the list. Wait, oh, there it is. It's just this list, the system layouts thing is huge. All right, Authentisign 2.0 layouts. So this is the one that I just created. Click on fruit basket, assign signature blocks, and lo and behold, everything gets put back in the same position I had it before. Easy peasy. Another thing that they fixed recently with this Authentisign 2.0, if you applied a layout to something that had already been applied, or that didn't have it applied already, it was like doubling up the signature blocks and doubling up all the parts and pieces that you added. They finally fixed that, so it's a lot easier to use now. All right, so that's it for layouts. Options is our final signing details. So this is where we're going to go through and make sure that we have the name put in. It used to be that there was a cutoff to how long the names could be. Now it's pretty huge. You can put in a lot of information up the top here, but make sure that this is actually lining up with whatever the purpose is of this particular signing. I can't stress this enough. This used to be the literal first step for the old signing system, and now it's kind of shuffled off into something that I don't really like. It's also present right up here at the very top of the screen. So if I hit save changes on options here, you notice that it actually saves the change up at the top. So just remember that this is up here, but you also have the option to come into the signing details and make that change there. It gives you an option to check the expiration dates, get in reminders, or even change where the Authentisign block is going to be. That it's effectively like a receipt number that's going to be printed onto this. And then you can also clear everything out if you needed to, clear all the markups and so on. But some of these details are actually going to be clarified as soon as we click on next. So it's going to ask us, do you have an expiration date in mind? So in my case, I want to say that it's actually going to have to be tomorrow. And then we want to make sure that we're going to be sending a reminder every day at 1, 2, 3, whatever, AM or PM. So the reminders aren't quite as robust as they used to be, but that's okay. So I'm going to hit the customize invite option. And I'm going to send this off with a custom subject. Please sign immediately. There we go. Excellent. So I'm going to have a special message for John, and then I'm going to leave the generic message for Martha's information, and we'll send that off. So that customized the invites, and then I hit send, and that'll send those invites out. Now, once you guys have actually sent this particular signing off, what it's going to do is actually show us the signings page. Now, there's a couple different things that you guys need to know about this. When we've been going through in the transaction, again, this little navigation bar over here on the right-hand side, there's this signings button that allows us to jump into either the classic view, which is where it defaults to, or the new view. Now, in our case, since we only had one item that we'd sent off and it was in the new, it knew that this was where we wanted to be. And it even shows the current status of this. So with the classic view, just so you guys see what this used to look like, with the classic view, signings look like this. Oh, there we go. If it was in the process of being created, it would have a gear, say in wizard. If it had been sent off but not fully signed yet, it would have a little lightning bolt. And then finally, if it had been signed and approved, there'd be a little certificate showing that it was done. Now it actually is just going to make it a lot more explicit. So now when we get into the signings, it's going to actually show us, all right, here's the signing. I can see more details about it. It shows that it's been sent. It shows whether or not they've completed it. And you can even see the participants by holding your cursor over that or clicking on the name and then seeing all the details from here. Now, this also gives us the option to change the email address. So if we put in the wrong email address or there was a misspelling, whatever, we can update that. And then we can also resend to any of the unsigned participants so that anybody who had already completed it doesn't have to worry about it. And there's even options to reset this, which actually brings us back to the exact same page that we saw before. Duplicate this signing. So if we needed to get this entire process started over again, but I didn't want to actually have to start from scratch, just take the information that I have and send it off with the new signature blocks. Or we can even delete this signing. Now, it has everything broken down into participants, the forms and certificates, and then the history. So it shows, all right, this was created, document added, participant added, blah, 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 signing sent. So you notice this is actually starting from oldest to newest. All right. Now, let's actually take a look at what this is going to appear as for our clients. Actually zoom this in so you can actually read this. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. So here we have our signature. This is going out to Martha. And we also have another one that was sent out to John. Notice the John one actually has please sign immediately. And then the additional message that I customized here, Martha will sign and you'll be good to go. One of the big notable exceptions to how this system used to work is that we used to have an option to be sign in line. Now it's just everybody gets it at once and everybody signs at once. So got start signing for John. We're going to go ahead and complete his signing first. And if you guys remember, we actually had to put a pin in for this. So I'm going to just go ahead and put his pin in, hit OK. There we go. Participant acknowledgement, blah, 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 blah. I accept. And let's go ahead and start moving through this process. So hit start. Here's my sign option. This is where he gets to either choose the style that he wants to sign as. He can choose from a big selection nowadays. It used to be a lot shorter. He likes this old school, end of the 80s, early 90s handwritten font. There's also an option to draw if we needed to. And then there's also an option to upload if there's one that he wants to keep for the future. But he's just going to use this one. Set signature. Hit the sign. Yes. And I'm going to choose none of the above. Perfect. Click, 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 click. Oh, and look at that, I'm done. So whenever we click on this complete signing option, that means that everything is completed. It shows this signing ID. Now, this is an important element. This is literally the receipt of the signing. This is showing us that it's literally a legally binding document, and this is the code that's going to indicate that to anybody that has any questions about it. They can print it off, they can download it, and that's it. There used to be an extra couple steps in the previous version of the system where they would ask them if they would like to create an account or any of this extra stuff. They don't have to do that anymore. So if they end up having a good experience, they can also leave a little survey here, but this is the end of the process. That's it. Additionally, we need to get Martha signed. So I'm going to jump into hers, start signing. She's got her own pin. Here we go. Excellent. Now, there's one thing that you guys need to remember if you do end up in a situation where there's a client that has a little bit of difficulty with mobility. My mom has really bad arthritis, so I always try and contextualize stuff for her. How would she need to be interacting with things if she were going to be doing stuff? There's a really easy way to navigate through this. If you guys need someone to kind of move through things without having to do a lot of clicking with the mouse, hit the space bar and it'll move them through almost everything on the page. They're still going to have to click on a couple things here and there. Let's not do that one. Let's do that one. But then when I hit space, it signs, space, it signs, hit the arrow. Oh, wait. Come on, there we go. Click, that one's already done. There we go. Hit space, hit space, hit space, and they're done. So I would still recommend to people that if they want to just rapid fire through everything, click on this little X to navigate around and make sure that everything that you just signed away was something that you agree with or that you know about at least. But once they're done, they can hit finish. There's also a reject option. Now the reject option does have a little reason. They have to choose some information on here to let us know that that's the issue. There's also options on here if you guys want to change your signature. So like if they got through this process and like, you know what, that font is garbage. I'm going to change this over to, let's do this fancy one, set signature. All right. Sign. Sign, sign. Perfect. So, oh, and then the last thing is feedback. But again, once they finish this and complete the signing, they're going to be giving their feedback here as well. All right. Now, something else with the signings. This signing ID that we see here is actually the exact same signing ID that John was given whenever he was creating or whenever he was completing his signing. So the exact same number. All right. Now, once they've completed their signing, you'll notice that they actually receive an email letting us know that, oh, would you look at that? We've got a signing complete for John and a signing complete for Martha. When we click on these individually, you can see that she's actually being presented with individual versions of each and every one of the forms that has the signatures on them. And then it also provides us with a single button that allows us to download all of the forms in the exact same arrangement that we had when we sent them out and just add it into one PDF. And then there's also a certificate of validation and completion for each of the documents. Each of these certificates is actually going to be important if you have a situation with like a lender or bank or something that's maybe not particularly fond of transaction desk. The good news is this is kind of old information at this point. Before the pandemic, there were some issues with it. I have not heard a single person even call to ask about what they needed to get to a lender since 2020. So I think after we're about to start year 3 of the pandemic, everybody's kind of gotten used to doing things remotely. Not that we're working remotely or whatever, but we're still doing classes remotely and calls remotely, help remotely. Anyway, all right. So that's it for the signing process. Let's hop back into transaction desk. As we saw, both of our signers have completed that process. So when I get back into that same transaction and see the signings, I now see the status is completed. Both of my participants have actually signed. I can even see the little green check boxes when I hit, or when I hold my cursor over show participants. And if I click on the actual name of the signing, this is going to show me, oh, looks like he authenticated and everything was approved. She authenticated and everything was approved. Now, if anybody had rejected anything along the course, they would also have that option in there as well. So it'll show authenticated and then it will have a little thing for the rejected. Now, once we've actually gotten all of these done, it's important to recognize that under the documents now, there is going to be a little signing folder that was created that shows all of the different documents that were signed. This is a big change that they made from the previous version. Whenever you were going through the signing process originally, it literally just dumped all of the signed versions of the forms into this particular folder. Now, part of the reason why, again, I stress that everybody should make sure that they've named the signing something that's going to be coherent is because when we get into the new signing process and it signs all the documents and puts it into this folder, it's going to actually have the folder name match whatever the signing name was. So this is going to make a lot more sense if you guys end up jumping in and you're like, oh, I've got this listing agreement. This was the signing that I sent off. It looks like it was completed at 10:41. So here we are. And it's going to show us all of the forms that we had them sign. So we've got the blank addendum, the COVID, the disclosure, the OREC listing agreement. All of those have a little green padlock to the left. This is indicating to us that this is certified and digitally signed. This way we know that this is actually the signed version of the document and not just the original version that we have in forms. It's also going to help us, since it's in this folder format, so that we don't have to worry about seeing similarly named documents. So like this 1107 4th South Street, Pawnee. If I go back here, I can see the original version of that I didn't have signed. So instead of dumping everything in there and then you see two of the exact same thing, but one of them has a green thing next to it, everything is put under the folder that was assigned for the signing. Now, this is also going to include each of the certificates. So just like the client was offered that certificate that validated the legality of this particular signing, this certificate is also going to be provided in here as well. All right. That's it for the signing process. Let's now take a look at these documents. So when I initially was going through and adding everything in during the wizard phase, on step 5, we got to the documents page where I just added in this PDF. It was mostly just for an example, but I wanted to address how to actually modify documents. So let's say that we do end up having something that I scanned and uploaded into the system, and I need to make some subtle changes to this. Over on the right-hand side here, there's this menu button where we can see preview, print, download, some of the other generic options, but there's something called slice/markup that we need to discuss. Under slice/markup, we get to choose either slicing things or marking them up. Markup is a fairly simple process. We'll talk about that in a moment, but slicing is allowing us to see an overview of all the pages of this particular document. We can select pages and rotate them if we needed to. We can also maybe select pages and save those as a separate document. So like, notice this is actually for a completely different address. This is 314 Boulder Street. So I have all three of those pages selected. I'm going to hit save. We're going to save this as, with just the selected pages, as a new document. So 314 Boulder, Pawnee. Oh, actually, let me give it a name that's not going to be weird. There we go. So I've got this saved as a separate document. I'm going to hit save. And since these are still selected, maybe these were spare pages, maybe you guys had scanned something and it scanned front and back, even though there wasn't anything on the back. Whatever the situation is, you can hit this delete button to remove the pages and then save the document that you have. So now I've got it rotated into the correct position. I've saved that. It doesn't have any spare pages. And now when I go into this 314 Boulder, it's only got the information for that particular realist printout. So it makes it really easy. But let's say that we needed to mark stuff up on this. So I'm going to go in here to menu, go back to slice/markup and do markup. This is an easy way for us to kind of get everything marked up the same way that we would have seen if we were doing the filling out on the forms. So we can add in some text if we needed to. Adjust this, and we'll add some squiggly lines on there. We can add an ellipsis, we can add a rectangle, add in some highlights. There's lines if we needed to, let's say, mark out something that was maybe not applicable. Move it to position a little better. There we go. And there's even an option to redact a whole section. So if something was incorrect in this whole area, we can just mark that all out. All right. So save it if you guys want to keep that. Close if not. Yes. All right. One of the last things that I wanted to discuss was, or directly in Transaction Desk, I should say. One of the last things I wanted to discuss in Transaction Desk is the, oh no, there's two things here. Yeah, there we go. Okay. We're going to talk about the templates now. So I mentioned at the beginning of class, whenever you create a transaction, it offers you the option to use a specific template that you've already created. Down here at the very bottom left, there's a little gear icon. It says settings. On here, we have the preferences, which is where you guys can check the information that's going to be applied whenever you're going to be signing things. It also has some extra stuff in here if you guys wanted to add in branding and things like that. But on this settings page, there's also the transaction templates. Transaction templates is where we can see any of the templates that we've created, as well as any of the ones that our office has created. Now, it's going to be indicated over here on the left-hand side. If I hold my cursor over this little profile icon, it says agent. If this was something that was actually created by the office, it'll show two individuals here. And if you hold your cursor over it, it'll say office. Now, unless you're a super user, which means that it's a broker or somebody who has admin level permissions in your office, you won't be able to create office level transaction templates. So in my case, I can only create the transaction templates for myself. If I click on add up at the top right here, you'll notice that there isn't a button here for ownership. So I mentioned when we were creating the transaction templates, if you don't have any, it won't appear. If you guys click on that add option and you don't see an option for ownership, that means you do not have permission to create office level templates. But in my case, I'm just going to create one for myself. I just need to kind of gather some of the stuff that I have for property management. So property management agreement or listing packet. Let's do packet instead. Okay. Type, and we're going to do residential lease. I'm not going to put a description in there. It only appears whenever you guys are looking at the transaction templates. Unfortunately, when you guys are going through and adding in a specific transaction template, it doesn't show you anything besides the name. So There's no reason to put in the description, but you can put one in if it helps you at all. So I'm going to click on save. And on here, we now get checklists, contacts, documents and folders, and forms, as well as a section here for teams and sharings if you guys have anybody else that's working either with your account, like if you have a admin, an assistant, or something like that. But most importantly, when you're on this transaction templates, is adding in documents and folders, as well as the forms. So what I'm going to do, open up the forms button. So I just click the little plus. I'm going to go to the property management contracts and forms and start adding in some of the things that I needed to add for here. Now, there's a couple different ways for us to actually add things onto templates. There's two schools of thought. One of them is if you add all of the forms that you might need. So, there's still going to be a lot of things that you're not going to need from those folders. But let's say that you guys end up in a situation where, all right, I just got this new lease or this new sale and or new listing, and I need to add in X, Y, or Z form that I don't usually add. If you have a template that's specifically just everything, it's just a kind of one-stop shop, you can always go back and remove things that you don't need from the transaction itself, but then the template will at least provide you with all of the information that you have to have. The alternative is to create a specific template for each and every variation of those kinds of listings or sales or whatever it is that you're creating a transaction of. And that way you don't end up having to worry about like a bunch of bloat to your transaction. You're not having to worry about, oh, wait, why do we even have this? We don't even need to worry about this until after the sale has been completed or something. So it's always best, in my opinion, to just have specific templates so that you don't have a lot of access to the files that you're working with. At least in my case, it helps me keep focused, and I have ADD, so that's always a miracle if I get to. So I like having the specific templates, but there's also the possibility that you guys just want to have a one-stop shop. Hey, look, I'm doing a residential listing. Grab that template, remove the files that you don't need, or just completely ignore them because you don't have to do anything with them. You can just leave them sitting there halfway filled out, never send it off to be signed, never fill it out all the way, and it doesn't hurt anybody. Same thing goes with the documents and folders. Documents and folders, though, is going to have the option to either add a folder or add a document. If you end up adding a folder, disclosures, inspections, appraisals. There we go. And then you can jump into this and then add another document from here. Upload PDFs, Word files, Excel files, PNG, JPEG. I mean, there's a variety of different things. But you can add those in there. You can add them into folders. You can add them into subfolders of folders of folders. There's a huge variety of ways that you guys can get this laid out. I have noticed that there are a couple offices that have like little collections of company-specific documents that they kind of want everything bundled together. This is a great way to make sure that all of those are added. And you don't miss out on anything, you haven't forgotten anything. Also, whenever you guys are uploading documents, whenever you click on add document, I've been solely focused on trying to get you guys in on this blue bar, either clicking and dragging or clicking on here to open the folder to see what's there. But there's also an option to upload from DocBox, which is the repository of all of the previous documents you've ever interacted with on Transaction Desk. Or you can also import from third party, which includes Dropbox, the actual Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, or Box, if anybody's still using Box. There's also an email upload option and even a download contact card, which allows you to add things directly to this. But we're not going to discuss that much. All right. So that's it for the templates. If you guys do end up making any changes to the templates, it automatically saves anything that you've added to it. But if you guys want to make any changes to the name or the description, there's just an update button up at the top. It used to be that I kind of improperly assigned that a little bit more importance than I needed to. If you guys add forms and documents, make changes to the contacts or checklists or whatever the case may be, you don't have to hit that update button once you're done. If I go back out of this and then jump back into the transaction templates and take a look at that particular transaction template, it still has all of that information added on there. You don't have to hit the update button. Anyway, all right. So we did the templates. Now we need to go talk about the property data forms. This is actually something that I genuinely love about how this is set up. For those of you guys who have add edit permission, I wanted to show you guys a special treat for you. Under the forms button, or if you guys are just adding a form to the transaction, actually, you know what, let's do that instead. Keeping it all in line with each other. Go to my forms, click on add. So I'm going to go into the MLS specific forms. And under here, there's actually the property data forms. We've got one for each property type: commercial, leasing, residential, and vacant land. I'm going to choose the one for residential since this is a residential listing, and click add. Now, this has been added to the bottom of my list. I'm going to click this here. And as we saw before, whenever we were filling out forms, it's going to start grabbing some of the details that we've already filled out. So in my case, it's actually filling out the property data form that I'm going to need to use to upload into Matrix later. So I need to switch this over to self. I need to make sure that this only says mains and that the street type says street. There we go. I can put in my subdivision, parcel number. Let's do a township range and section as well. Okay. All right, so what's happened here is that it's actually imported a bunch of information. I had to give it a little bit of polish just because the street name in transaction desk actually grabs pre-direction, post-direction, and street type, dumps it all into one line. So I had to split that off into the way that Matrix prefers it. But whenever we start going through and actually filling out this information, up at the top of our screen, there's actually an upload listing button. And again, if we're zoomed out a little bit further, you can actually see that it says it. But if you hold your cursor over it, it'll say upload listing. And what this is actually doing is it's taking the data that I've already filled out on this form, creating an incomplete listing in Matrix. And then that way, all I have to do is just jump into Matrix and complete that process. Here's my listing that I just created. Go to residential, and it already has a lot of that property information filled out for me. So now all I have to do is just go through and polish up the last bits of information I need on here. And the last bits, I mean, there's a whole bunch of information, but you get the idea. Makes it a lot easier to create listings. Then you're only filling this out once and then polishing up the information on Matrix. You never have to worry about going through and filling this out once and then having to turn it into something digital later. But that's it for class today. If you guys do end up having any questions or problems along the way, you can always get in contact with us. Just as a reminder, Matrix does have that tie-in whenever you have a listing that you want to turn into a transaction. There's a button over here to the right to do it. And then there's also a button underneath the photo that allows you to just start a transaction and import the data directly. But we're all set. It's 11. I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go. If you guys have any questions though, go ahead and ask those now, or if you guys would like to just give us a call at the service desk, we can answer those questions over the phone. But thank you guys again. Oh, perfect. Tammy, I got you.
Just real quick, what is the most efficient way to get the documents to your broker whenever you have everything complete?
That was the review button. So once something has been signed, or even just anything that's been uploaded at all, there's a submit button. This will send a notification to the broker, and then the broker can go through on the, I think it's a broker tools, I think is what it's labeled as on the broker side. And they'll see everything that the agents have asked to review. And then once that's been approved, you'll see a little icon on here indicating that it's ready to go.
Okay, so do I need to hit that submit button for each document separately?
I believe so. Oh, no, there is an option
Okay.
to request review just using the selection. So you just select all of the items and then hit request review.
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. That's a good question. All right. Well, again, I appreciate you guys joining us today. I'm going to leave the session open for just another minute here. But if you guys have any problems or questions in the future, just get in contact with us over at the service desk, either by email or by phone. Just as a reminder, we are open 8 to 5:30 every day, every weekday. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close up shop. Again, thank you guys for joining us. Have a good one. Be safe, social distance, wear your mask when you're around people, and hopefully we'll see you guys in all of our future classes.